And as you're lying there, what do you remember of the scan this morning? I love that ATM. It's just so, it just includes so many ways of sensing yourself that you don't normally think of. So we talk about transfer of learning. So is it possible for you to remember any of what you felt this morning toward the end of the lesson? Was it something about your volume or the shape you were making? Or the spaces? And how's it coming along, this ability of, if we like, this inclusive attention, this ability to hold more of ourselves in our image at the one time? Our internal experience, our sensation, our volume, the shape we make, the spaces around us. Where you are in the room. Where's up and down, left and right? And come to lying on your right side. If you can get comfortable, could you rest your head on your right arm? If that's not comfortable for you, you can use some supports, but feel free as the lesson goes on that maybe you can substitute this long right arm under your head. Notice the direction you have your right arm in. Is it long above your head? Is it forward? And how that's going to influence, obviously, where your head is in space, if your head's resting on your arm. Get a sense of where your head is in relationship to your pelvis. Are both shoulders over each other, or is one a little bit more forward or back or up or down relative to your underneath shoulder? Do your two hips feel over each other, or again, is the upper hip a little bit forward or back or up or down, or a combination of any of those in relationship to your lower hip? How do your 2 feet rest on each other? Very, very rarely do you see people lying with their feet exactly resting on top of each other. You usually see that most people, the Maybe the toes of one foot are behind the other or in front of the other. Let's just notice how your feet are on top of each other. And then if you feel your knees, does one knee feel a little bit forward of the other or back of the other, up or down? And whatever position you've chosen to be in here, could you begin, or intend is probably a better word, so that you don't need to do it, but you're mobilizing your intention to find a way to lightly lift your upper leg, your left leg, a little bit away from the right. And you're simply noticing, how do you mobilize your intention? What do you do? Does something hold in your breath? Does something begin to push hard into the floor? Could this be something that was really easy, that again, you're looking to find comfort here? Okay, so pause that, and then very gently, wherever your knees are in space, could you bring them a little bit higher towards your head? So you'll be bending your hips a little bit higher. And see what it's like to lift your leg there. Again, you don't have to lift it. It's more, how do you mobilize your intention to lift it? Is that a little bit easier with your knees bent up higher? Or harder? So you're just simply making distinctions. So as I said, you don't have to lift it. It's more, how do I mobilize myself to get my leg to be light? And try a few different positions. You could go a little bit higher or a little bit lower with your knees. Just really feeling how the position of your legs influences the lightness of your leg. And feel when you go to lift it, do you want to lift the knee a little bit first, or the foot? Okay. And then could you bring your knees to where they would be pointing down at about a 45-degree from your hips? So they're pointing down at about 45 degrees, so that's 90. Okay? Yep, that's it. And just really gently lift your leg, or mobilize your intention to lift your leg there. Okay, so now leave your knees where they are, and could you begin to bend your heels or your feet a little bit closer to your buttocks? So you're bending your knees a little bit more, so your feet will go, if you're bending your knees more, usually more back in line with your buttocks. And again, play with, how does that influence the amount of bend you have in your knees? How does that influence the lightness or not of your leg? Because we're going to be really specific in this lesson at finding a position for your legs where Your hips are at 45 degrees, your knees are at 45 degrees, so that if that's happening, your feet will be back in line with your pelvis and your spine, if you like. So we're just getting you to explore why this position. Why are we starting in this position? Is there something about finding this 45-degree angle of your hips and then a 45-degree angle of your knees? And then once you feel you've found that 45 degrees, maybe just play a little bit around with where your head is. And see, is the position of my head, if I take it maybe a little bit forward or a little bit back, does that also influence the lightness of my leg? But the big thing is that you want your heels to be back in line with your buttocks and your spine. So it's like you've got a really nice counterbalance there. And I'm just going around adjusting a few people just to give you the feel of where it is. So Ray, can you bring your feet back? Those down. That's now your heels in line. Yep, with your pelvis. Great. Okay. So pause there. Again, where do you want your upper arm to be? As many places it can be. But just play around with where you'd like it to be, where you feel that you're more comfortable and that you've got the ability to move a little bit in different directions. Okay, so we've got our starting position. Okay. So again, very slowly, feeling your way, lift your whole left leg just a little away and down. And feel, what do you allow to happen through the rest of you to help here? And you're looking to find a way that your whole left leg lifts at exactly the same time. And again, this is just sort of an experiment, if you like. That's sort of what we're looking for, and you're simply noticing what you do. So your knee and your foot lift at exactly the same time, and they return at exactly the same time. They lift at exactly the same height. And again, what's happening with your breathing here? If you're having to hold your breath to do this, you haven't got it. And it's a small lift. You really don't want to get any higher than that your legs parallel to the floor. So it's not a big lift up in the air. So what do you allow to happen in your head and your shoulders and your pelvis and your spine, in your belly? Or is your strategy to just hold everything together and then to lift? So how do you allow this movement to go through you? It can be very subtle. And you might feel as you lift that maybe you roll just a little bit forward, or maybe you roll just a little bit back. Do whatever you need to find comfort. And once you've found comfort, the next really big suggestion for a constraint in this lesson is that can you do this movement without interfering with your breathing in any way at all? So that you're lying there, you're sensing your breathing, its rhythm, what's happening, and that you can find a way to lift your leg without needing to change that at all. So we'll leave that sort of as a background that you can keep coming back to. Okay, so now leave your knees together and lift your left foot only. So your whole right leg stays on the ground. So you're sort of pivoting a little bit. And feel, so it's not both feet, it's just one foot. So your feet are separating from each other. Your knees stay together. Your left foot and lower leg lift away from your right foot and your lower leg. And then you put your leg down, your foot down again. And one of the things with this lesson is maybe you might begin to notice that some muscles start to get a bit tired. If they are, you need to spread the load. You're trying to make some muscles do a little bit too much work. And notice as you lift your left foot, what lifts first? Is it your heel or your toes? And what touches down first? Again, you don't need to change it in any way at the moment. You're simply noticing. How do I detach my left foot from my right? And then whichever leaves first, if it's your heel that leaves first as you lift your foot, could you keep leading that movement with your heel so that when you touch down, it's the heel that touches down last? Or if you're leading with your toes, can you touch down, can you lead with your toes and touch down with your toes? But just do more of whatever it is that you're doing. And then a few times could you do the opposite? So if you were leading with the heel, now you're going to lead with the toes. And see, does something different happen through your hip or your pelvis? Maybe where you roll, depending on whether it's your heel or your toe that's lifting first. And then could you find a way that your heel and your toe could lift simultaneously? And they touch down at exactly the same time. And does that change again where your weight rolls? How the weight shifts? Maybe what happens in your belly or your back? So your knees are staying together. And then a few times move between those three different options. So once the heel lifts and touches down last as you lift your foot, the toes lift and touch down last as you lower your foot. And then they both lift at exactly the same time. And again, for many of us, some of these movements with our feet are quite unusual. So find a speed that you know what you're doing. And that with each repetition, it's, can I make this easier? Can I make it more comfortable? And most especially that your breathing can be easy. Holding your breath is the best preparation you could do to not do it well. For it not to be pleasant. Okay, now leave your feet together. So just coming back to your original resting position and just see, how does that feel now? Does it feel any different on your side than it did at the beginning? And just lift your leg once or twice and down again. Okay, so now could you keep your feet together and lift your knee? So now your left knee is going to lift away from your right knee and your feet are going to stay together. The upper foot obviously is going to maybe turn a little bit on the opposite foot, but they're staying in contact with each other. And what's happening in your hip when you do this? So there's quite a few of you that to lift the knee, that you're bypassing the hip altogether and just doing a big roll back. That's absolutely fine, but have you got a hip joint in there? So that we're interested not just in rolling over the underneath hip joint, but something's happening in the upper hip joint as well. So stay on your side, place one hand on the greater trochanter of your hip, which is the big bony bit. So it's not your pelvis, it's down where you measure your hip joints. So it's here, Dan. Yeah. Let's just see that everyone's got a greater trochanter. It's here. Yep. Here, pat. That's your sit bone. There's your greater trochanter. That's fine. Greater trochanter, greater trochanter. Yeah, we got it, Sil. And very gently, just first of all, lift your foot again without your knee. And feel, does something happen in your greater trochanter? Do you feel something rotating in there? Your pelvis will also be rolling, will be rotating a little bit to do it. But can you feel there's something happening in this bone, that it's rotating a little bit around itself? It's down here. Yeah. And then a couple of times lift your knee. So if you're rolling your shoulders a long way back and your head a long way back, you're probably not using your hip joint. So your head should be able to stay pretty much where it is on your arm. And then could you sort of begin to do a little bit of an oscillation? So the knee goes down and the foot lifts, and then the foot goes down and the knee lifts. So you're sort of joining those two movements together. But keep your foot on the other foot if you're lifting your knee. No? And it doesn't have to be a big movement. And then could you find a way that if you lift your leg a little bit into the air, you could put your foot down and lift your knee. And then as your knee goes down, your foot will lift. And then as your foot goes down, your knee lifts. And as your foot lifts up, your knee goes down. So there's times when your foot, your whole leg is lifted, in between those moments when first the knee touches or your foot touches. And feel what's happening in that. In your hip joint. So this swinging around of the upper leg in the hip. And again, really be clear though that as you do it, most of you are getting it beautifully, you're not bracing everything else. So the major movement is happening in your leg, but you're allowing the movement to feel it through the rest of you, right up to your base of your neck, your sternum, your ribs, everything is in your image. It may only be doing a microscopic movement, very small movement, but it's in there. And have a rest on your back. And feel what's that done to your sense of self. Come back onto your side again. And we're going to go back to some movements that you did in just a slightly different orientation on Friday. So again, you have your left arm somewhere where it's supporting this movement, where it's helping you. Feeling that you've got this configuration, that your heels are in line with your pelvis and your spine. So just check that. Just check some of you. Where are your feet? Because some of you haven't got the bend in your knees yet. Okay, so now minimally lift your left leg. Minimally lift it. So again, you've got to find a way to organise all of yourself to lighten this leg, to allow it to lift. Maybe it would help thinking of some of the things we were doing this morning. And once you've got your leg lifted, could you hold it there a moment? Keep your hip and your knee in exactly the same configuration and begin to flex and extend your ankle. Just only your ankle, not your knee, not your hip. So your foot will still be back behind you in line with your pelvis, in line with your tailbone. And you're finding a way to do this, that how do I hold my leg here without bracing? So that even though your knee and foot are staying in the same configuration, that doesn't mean that the rest of you has to stay solid. So maybe something might still happen a little bit in your low back, who knows, or in your breathing, or in your belly, or in your shoulders. So how does this movement of your foot echo up through you without having to change the angle of your hip and your knee? Rest, pause whenever you need a rest. And always take a rest before you tire, if you can. So this is not about fatiguing your muscles or you thinking, oh, my muscles are weak, I have to get them stronger. It's about finding how you can use yourself more efficiently. Okay, next time, same thing, your left leg's just minimally lifted. And this time you're going to keep your ankle as it is, so your foot's on one level, it's not dropping down. Your heel and your foot are on one level. You're going to keep your knee in the same position and you're going to flex your hip a little bit, so your knee will be pulling a little bit higher in the direction. And then just back to where it was. Don't take it back any further. It's just coming forward into flexion. And then just going back to where it was. So your knee stays the same. Your foot stays the same. And then you can take it a little bit away from you, a little bit further down as well. So this is a movement of your hip joint. The rest of your leg is staying in the same configuration. And again, you're feeling, how does this go through me? Does anything happen in my low back, in my belly, in my head, in my ribs? And again, maybe microscopic, very small movement, but that you are allowing this movement to go through you. And pause again. And then the last joint is your knee. So again, you minimally lift your leg. Your ankle stays in the same configuration, flat, parallel to the floor. Your knee begins to bend and straighten a little bit. So your heel will be moving a little bit closer to your buttock and further away. So now you're differentiating your knee out. So these are giving you the opportunity, these movements are giving you the opportunity to really feel, some of these joints clearer to me than others. Was it easier to move my ankle or my knee or my hip? And again, finding a way that this movement of your knee, not your hip, movement of your knee, not your hip, can still go through you, even though you're keeping your hip and your foot in the same configuration. So just because you're keeping one or two joints in the same configuration doesn't mean that the rest of you can't be involved, can't still respond. Have a rest on your back again. So what's your sense of self, your self-image telling you about these movements? And notice as you're lying there, does one leg feel different than the other? Is one leg more rolled out than the other? Come back to that same configuration on your right side. So your feet are in line with your bottom of your pelvis. Just feel, is your arm still in the same position, your right arm? Or is it adapted or changed in some way from doing these movements? It looks as if many of your arms have got much longer up toward the ceiling. How did that happen? Okay, so again, left hand wherever you need it, left arm to give you a little bit of balance, to give you a sense of ease. So this time, as you lift your leg, You're going to find again an easy, light way to see if that's changed at all. And then once it's lifted, you're going to uniformly, and this, I'm going to leave you lots of time to explore this. You are going to bend your hip, your knee, and your ankle exactly the same amount. Just to bend them, not to straighten. Just to bend them a little bit and take you back to your neutral position. So you might want to think first before you do it, what's that going to do to the configuration of my leg? If my hip's going to bend a little bit, that's going to bring my knee higher. If my knee's going to bend a little bit, it's going to bring my heel closer to my buttocks. And if my ankle is going to bend a little bit, my heel's going to get longer and my toes are going to come closer to the front of my lower leg. So only flexing, not extending. So you hold your leg up and you find a way that your hips bending, your knees bending, and your ankles bending. And feel if all of these three major joints in your leg are bending, what's your lower back going to do? Where might your head want to move a little bit? Would this bending everything a little bit sort of make you a little bit smaller or taller? So again, you're not straightening it away. It's just very gently from the starting position, everything bends a little bit and goes back. Bends a little bit, goes back. Bends a little bit, goes back. And because it's an asymmetrical movement, obviously something asymmetrical is going to happen in your torso. So you would expect that your left and right sides are going to do something just a little bit different. So as you flex that left leg up, does one side get a little bit shorter? One side get a little bit shorter or longer? So that you can really feel, because it's very easy to do this movement and just start to swing your lower back, whereas what we're looking for here is a really asymmetrical action. That your right leg is staying on the ground as it is, and how does your left leg? So many of you are starting to feel that it's the left side that's going to round just a little bit more than the right. Maybe you'll get a little bit shorter on your right side than your left. A little bit of side bending might be coming in. But again, really be clear that your foot's not swinging forward. No, your foot's not swinging forward, that it really is still the heel coming to the buttock. Okay, so now very gently because it's the flexion that we were really after, getting the bending, allowing your back to lengthen, some of you a little bit. Could you then begin to extend your leg? But again, it's going to go long. Just as when we were flexing everything, the heel was coming closer to the buttock. If you're going to extend everything a little bit, your leg's going to get long down so that your heel will still be running in a line vertical with your spine. So you're not swinging your leg back behind you. It's getting long as if it's going to go to standing. And then it bends up again and your heel tracks up that vertical line towards your buttock. And then it lengthens long. And your knees coming forward and back. And you're gradually feeling, can your back do less work? That it will still be absolutely part of this movement, but that it's not doing all of the movement. So something's happening in your upper hip. And then just bring your attention for a moment as you continue it to what's happening in your underneath hip and your underneath shoulder. So even though we haven't put any of your attention there, can you feel the movement? How your weight needs to shift over your underneath hip, over your underneath shoulder, to get this really little pulse of flex, extend, flex, extend, flex, extend. And your foot is just moving up and down this vertical line in line with your buttocks. Let your leg rest on the other one again. And very simply and gently lift your leg. See, how does it feel now? Does it feel any lighter? And if it is, what are you allowing to be involved now that you weren't earlier? Roll onto your back, have a rest. Again, feel the influence of this lesson. What's happened here to find how the right side that you've been on for all that time, which has really been your weight-bearing side, and you've been really exploring how your left leg can become light or non-weight bearing and able to move easily through this whole pattern of bending and straightening. So, of course, what you're going to feel as you're lying there is dependent on your initial organisation. Come up to standing. Keep the sense of whatever it is. Transfer this quality up to standing. And again, this next bit will be dependent on your organisation. So take a step forward. Don't think, just take a step forward, and just feel on the foot you've stepped forward onto, how much easy up and down have you got on that leg? How easily could you get a little bit smaller or taller? That's really the movement we were just doing. Huh? And then if you step with the other leg, how organised is it to get a little bit smaller or taller? And hopefully you'll feel the two sides are different. That one's more organised to be the really boom leg, and one's organised to have a little bit more give in it. Which one would you prefer? And again, it's not that one's good or bad. Which one do you prefer? They're both useful for different things. But for many, so for some of us, to get this sense that I don't have to work so hard on my weight-bearing side. But for some of us who have that but don't have the bump, that's the great part of the lesson. So have a walk around and really give yourself time to feel that difference. How you come onto the leg, what happens in your low back, in your hip, your knee, in your chest, shoulders. So when you get this little bit more up-down, how does that change your contact with the ground? How does it change how your feet feel for the ground? When there's maybe a little bit more give. So if this feels, it looked pretty good for most of you. So most of you, even though you're one-sided, again, one-sided, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just unfamiliar for some of us. So do you find one side of you, do you want to look more down or up? Where would your attention go? Or to the side? See how this different organisation of your skeleton influences your neck, your eyes. Is there a quality in this lesson that you think, oh, this would be nice to have a bit more of? Sometimes. So it's been a long day, well done, and we'll see you again in the morning.